time to get up with the NFL Draft. 3 weeks away. And this morning, McShay has his new preview. 5 quarterbacks in the mock. He'll tell you where they're headed. Plus, Adam Schefter with an extraordinary interview that tells all of us exactly what has to happen before we will see football again. Don't miss it. And then, Sean Payton tested positive for COVID-19. He's doing much better. He joins us live to talk about that and his team as we get up with you, starting right now. It is a Tuesday. We are in Bristol again today. I'm Mike Greenberg, and I thank you for getting up with all of us. We have a terrific show ready to go. We will be here with you every single morning, and as I will say on every one of those mornings, as sports fans, we're going to get through this thing together. And we start with Get Up and Go and a bunch of big news around the world of sports, including the NCAA Division I Council voting yesterday to grant an extra year of eligibility for all student athletes in spring sports that had their seasons canceled due to the pandemic. Winter sports, such as basketball, were not included in that ruling. We'll have Jay Billis later this hour to talk about it. Meanwhile, news from the UFC. It appears that the highly anticipated match between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson is once again off. Khabib confirming on Instagram Live yesterday he's back home in Russia. He's unable to leave to compete, which would be April 18th. Elsewhere, the USTA announced that the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center in Flushing Meadows, New York, home of the U.S. Open, will begin to be converted into a medical facility starting today. The plans call for the facility to hold 350 temporary hospital beds. Golf, could a second edition of The Match between Phil and Tiger be in the works? Mickelson recently replied to a fan's question on Twitter saying that he was, quote, working on it, and adding that he wasn't teasing. So we can all look forward, we hope, to a rematch between those two. And NFL owners are expected to vote today on a proposal to expand the playoffs from 12 to 14 teams starting next season. If approved, only one team in each conference would get a wild card weekend bye. That's Get Up and Go. Meanwhile, the news this morning just released from Todd McShay, his 4th mock draft. And let's take a look at the quarterbacks. No change at number 1. It is still Joe Burrow going to the Cincinnati Bengals. That comes as no surprise and does not figure to change as we work our way towards that. No change either at 5. With Tua Tagovailoa going to the Dolphins. He has been medically cleared for all football activity following a hip injury he had in November. A lot to talk about there, and we will. Todd has Jordan Love at 6 to the Chargers for the 2nd straight mock draft. In his 2nd mock draft before the Combine, he didn't even have him going in the 1st round. So that's a huge jump. And then the 4th quarterback off the board is Justin Herbert at 9 to the Jaguars. In the last mock, he had Herbert going 13 to the Colts. Since that time, Indianapolis signed Phillip Rivers. You take a look here. He has Washington and the Lions at 2 and 3, passing on Tua, instead taking Chase Young and Jeff Okudah, respectively. The Jets at 11 make Alabama's Jerry Jeudy the first wide receiver selected. There will be a lot of those. And the Patriots at 23, not taking a quarterback in this mock draft, instead selecting an Iowa pass rusher, A.J. Epinesa. So a lot to get to there. We'll have McShay for you shortly, but this morning we do have back Dan Orlovsky and the big swagoo Marcus Spears, and delighted to have both of you guys there. And I want to start once again with Tua at 5, because it feels to me, and again, we'll have McShay here shortly, and we know that he is always hesitant to try and project trades and all the rest of that, but this feels like a conversation we've had a lot lately. Dan, I do not believe that Tua will still be available at 5, and I don't think you do either.
No, I don't think there's any chance that he falls to 5, Greeny, because the reality is this. Any question that a team like the Dolphins had about Tua Tagovailoa in January, they've been answered. And even if we had a normal offseason and we weren't dealing with the crisis that we are dealing with within our country, if you were just going through the process, all the questions that you had about him are answered. Is he recovered? Yes. Is he able to be moved around and working out right now? Yes. Is his long-term prognosis good? Yes. Is his hip fully healed? Yes. So all those questions that you might have had reservations on, Greeny, they've all been answered. And so teams are going to have to stop trying to find reasons why or to protect them from not drafting him or whatnot, because any question that I had about Tua medically has been answered so far.
So, Marcus, if I were a lawyer, I would then throw 2 quick questions at you. The first of them would be, if you're going to take Tua as high as 5 or trade up to take him at 3, wouldn't you be willing to take him number 1? The difference between those aren't really that significant. And the second question I would follow up with would be, if that is the case, then if you believe, and I know you've said it before on this program, Marcus, that you think Tua is a better prospect than Burrow, if not for the injuries, then what would stop Cincinnati, if they believe that, or any other team, from taking Tua #1 or ahead of Joe Burrow now?
Well, the answer to your first question, G, is that nothing would stop me from going up to get him. Now, one is a little caveat. I can't get away from the fact that we watched Joe Burrow have arguably the greatest season of a college quarterback in the history of NCAA football. That's the number one thing. And I think a lot of people, that's going to be hard in Cincinnati building to get over. And him being from Ohio as well. So two things are in play there. It's kind of a no-brainer when you talk about the synergy. But if you were to remove this hip injury and you were to remove the questions about Tua's health and durability, that's one of the questions that we're missing. We continue to talk about this hip injury. One of the issues is durability as well. That's one of the scouts' hang-up when it comes to Tua. If it had not been for that, Tua would have been, I think, the first pick in the draft based on everything we talked about leading up to not only this draft, but during the season when we had the conversation about tanking for Tua. Everybody thought pre-last season in college football that Tua was a surefire #1 pick because Trevor Lawrence couldn't come out of school. We lauded over how he throws the ball, how well he played, playing for Nick Saban, being prolific, breaking all of these records. So nothing would have changed that outside of that hip injury against Mississippi State. I think obviously Joe Burrow would have ascended and we would have had a conversation, but I think the overall body of work would have put Tua at the #1 spot if you were taking a QB in this year's draft had it not been for the injury.
Go ahead, Dan.
I think we also have to make sure that we understand, like, very rarely do quarterback injuries in college scare teams away from drafting that player early. Like, we have examples of guys that were hurt in college and still drafted early, whether it was Marcus Mariota or a guy like Deshaun Watson. Like, those guys had injuries in college that could scare teams away, and they were still drafted early. Teams actually went up and got Deshaun Watson, obviously. And I just sit back and think of two things when it comes to that situation, comparison to Deshaun Watson and the Tua situation. I wonder how many teams looked at Watson and were scared off from that ACL injury, and maybe were hesitant that because of that injury, they were concerned about drafting him high, and then the Texans go up and get him. And you better learn from that mistake from other teams being scared to draft a quarterback when it comes to injury. And the second thing is this. We're all looking at this situation as a negative for Tua, and I've talked with people that work really closely with him right now, and these are not agents, these are not hype people that are trying to build up his potential draft slot. These are people working with him, and they rave about how he has attacked this situation. They rave about how much he has matured throughout this process, and they've mentioned how he's taking this situation that we all look at as a negative and using it as a positive to mature and to develop and grow and ready himself for his NFL career. He's actually looking at it as a kind of a springboard or a stepping stone rather than something that's holding him back. And I think that speaks volumes for kind of what teams are getting when it comes to a leader and a competitor.
All right, that seems like the best he can do under these circumstances, of course. And quickly, let me run through a couple of other names for you here, because you just said it. Hembo sent me the list. Deshaun Watson had a torn ACL. Carson Wentz had a broken wrist. Marcus Mariota had an MCL. Robert Griffin III, RG3, had an ACL. Jake Locker had a variety of injuries. Sam Bradford had a shoulder. All those guys went high in the draft. Let me move on to some other pieces here. We'll get back to this. We'll spend a lot of this morning on Tua and Burrow. Marcus, let me turn to you on a name that I think a lot of football fans, you might consider yourself a pretty significant fan even of college football, and be saying, who is Jordan Love, and how is he suddenly going 6th in this draft to the Chargers? Marcus, how would you answer that question?
I don't know, but gee, I know people have become enamored, and we see this happen in every draft when you start to get around this time where you see this ascending quarterback come from somewhere, and you're like, who is this guy? What is he? My problem is Jordan Love's opportunities, and obviously it has something to do with the teams around you. His opportunities when he played against elite level college, it was 0-4, 36 QBR. And I know that's a little bit skewed because you're probably running for your life majority of the time. Receivers aren't uncovering. But those things kind of glare out to me. Now, obviously, people talk about his arm angle and his ability, his similarities to Pat Mahomes and all of that. And Look, I am for what if you think a player is supposed to go high and you have him that high, I'm all for it. It's just hard for me sometimes when we get enamored with things that look like other people that we start comparing them to. Don't compare nobody to damn Patrick Mahomes right now, okay? Can we give it a second? We just finished talking about a season where Patrick Mahomes is arguably the best quarterback we've ever seen play football, and now we talking about Jordan Love has some of those same similarities, so he should go number 6 overall. That's my only issue. Against good competition, he struggled. Now, that doesn't mean this guy can't go to the league and develop and sit out for a year and see the game and play at that level. I would just have my reservations about going up to number 6 to take Jordan Love with all of the plethora of talent that's available to you, and Jameis Winston and Cam Newton are sitting out there in free agency right now.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, Marcus brings up a ton of valid points. I think the reality is this, Greeny, when you're looking at the quarterback position when it comes to the draft, it's really about production versus potential. And no, Jordan Love doesn't have the production that you're looking for, certainly into Marcus's point, against the top-tier teams. But the potential that you look at as a player, you go, man, what could this guy be with better people around him and better coaching and a really more diverse system? And you look at some of the plays that he does make, some of the arm angles that he does display, and you go, I could do something with that. There's some stuff there that I cannot coach. And that's the balance that these teams are trying to fight with between production and potential when it comes to Jordan Love. And I'm willing to bet that they're going to bet on the potential of him.
So if we look back on the mock draft, and again, we'll have McShay for you coming up at the top of our second hour today, so a little less than an hour from now. He has 4 quarterbacks going in the first 9 picks. And then I mentioned he has a 5th in the mock draft. Jacob Eason he has going in the 2nd round. And we will get the answers to all of the questions from McShay as he joins us a little later this morning. We're just getting started on what will be a very